listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana, founders of the Life Coach Method. Each one of our uplifting and deep dive episodes is geared to help you tackle the things that hold you back from having the most magnificent life you deserve. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be coached.
Hey everybody, Dr. Cali Estes here with another wonderful episode of Unpause Your Life. My next guest needs no introduction. She has published a ton of books. She is a pioneer in the mental health and addiction space, and she has won every single award known to man in this space. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Claudia Black.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here. It's always fun.
I am so excited you're here. So I normally don't get nervous when I have people on, but your work shaped what I did with my career and changed everything for me. So I just want to tell you, I remember sitting in a college class when they were talking about the hero and the scapegoat and family systems theory. And I went, that's what's wrong with my family. That was like the pivoting moment. And I went, I'm going to study this. So thank you for that.
Yeah. It's always sort of funny for me when I hear people say they get really nervous, or I see people get really nervous. And, I think it's just me, it's just me. And at the same time, I do understand that my work has made a difference in people's lives personally and professionally. And it's such a wonderful aha moment when somehow things are explained in a way that makes sense out of something that we've never been able to make sense out of. And I know for me, I sat in a graduate school class. I was maybe 21 years of age. I'd come from a very violent alcoholic home, but I couldn't have told you that. It was just sort of the way we lived. And this was a class on alcoholism, which was very rare back in the 1970s. And the instructor talked about personality changes and blackouts. And that was my moment. It was the aha. For the first time in my life, I understood what it was that we had been subjected to. And that wasn't that my father was crazy. It wasn't that he was raised in poverty. It wasn't that he had a brain tumor like my mom at one point thought this must be the reason for all this, horrific behavior. But in some ways, it was as simple as alcoholism, often encompassed with personality changes and blackouts. And so again, I understand when we talk today about what it's like to grow up in a family in which there's addiction, and it's never been really explained before just how significant that is for people. It's powerful.
Yeah, and you explain it in such an easy, beautiful way, and it just breaks it down so simple. So when I'm working with a client, I always go, we're going to revert back to Claudia Black's work. And I hit them with it and they go, wow, it's so easy. It's because
So
there's so many things in psychology that are so long and so convoluted and so complicated, and the average person just doesn't grasp it. But when I lay this out for them with the family systems theory, it's so easy. Where did you come up with this?
The reality is it is very complex. I think probably truly one of my gifts is to make sense out of it in a way and that people can understand it. And I think one of the gifts of that is it also gives people a voice to be able to talk about their experience, to be able to own their experience. And I've always felt we need to take the mystery out of therapy. We need to take the mystery out of these diagnoses that we've put on people, that there are reasons that we feel the way we feel, we think the way we think, and we behave, and that we can put words to that. And it's not because there's something inherently defective about who we are.
Where did you come up with some of your inspiration for these ideas and these books? Where did it come from for you?
Oh, I think that, first of all, I was raised with addiction, and for me, I had a core belief coming out of what was, as I said, a violent alcoholic home, and that was that nobody deserved to live with the kind of fear and shame that we lived with. It was like, I didn't deserve it, my brother didn't deserve it, my sister, my mother, nor did my dad in his addiction deserve to live with the kind of fear and shame that I think was so much a part of his reality as well. And in some ways, I think that also came because in spite of what happened in my early years, I saw so much of the goodness in my dad, and I saw it leave in time. And somehow, just intuitively, I understood that something was happening to him. And so, versus that this was about who he was, or that there was something wrong with us for this. And I couldn't have articulated it, but there was a knowing that I had. And the reality was, I thought I was going to work with, I was a caregiver, and that I was scripted in that role. So it was only natural that I would become a social worker in my case. And I thought I was going to work with really angry girls, because that was my first job. And I loved these really angry girls in residential treatment programs. They were having lots of behavioral problems, and they were going through life saying, there's something really wrong here, and you're going to darn well notice me. And I think in hindsight, I loved working with these angry kids because they had something I didn't have, and that was anger. The anger in my house was just squelched out of all of us. There was so much violence. There was no room for anybody's anger because there was already too much violence coming from my father. And for them, I felt like they had an honesty that so many of us who had an ability to look good didn't have. And that was very helpful in terms of my taking a look at ultimately the roles that I saw, and how it is you can look good in spite of what it is that's going on. And yet in that so-called looking good, be us that lost child, or the comic in our family, or the people pleaser, or the hero child, that in spite of that, problems become very visible, particularly as people enter into their adult life. And the reality is, if somebody wanted to look at this person when they were younger, they would probably see the vulnerabilities. But for me, in my very first job, I was asked to develop a family program. Well, I was 26 years of age. I was in an alcohol treatment program, didn't know what in the world I was doing there. It was sort of a fluke that I even took this job. And in my naivety, I thought families meant kids. That's not what they wanted. They wanted me to simply work with the partners, but they didn't tell me that. So as a child of an alcoholic, you don't ask questions. So I invited all these kids in, and they were little kids and they were teenage kids. But back then, people were older when they first came to treatment, so many of their kids were of adult age. So I had all these, because of time, I put them all in groups. And literally in front of me, I saw the progression. I saw the little children still able to speak the truth. I saw the denial in the kids by the time they were 9, 10, 12 years of age. I saw that pride in their survivorship in their late teens and the early 20s. But when I was working with the 27 and older, you saw their life begin to fall apart. And it literally sat in front of me. I saw their relationship problems. I saw their self-harm. I saw their depression, their anxiety. The other is, you were working with alcoholics or addicted people in general, and their partners. And so many had been raised in addictive homes. So as I say, it was almost this visual living psychodrama in front of me, wherein they gave me, with that belief that nobody deserves to live like this, and that really gave me the energy to give voice to what it was that I was seeing.
When you first came out with your theory and your ideas, were you worried that there would be backlash of, hey, this isn't right, or you can't do this? Or did you just put it out there and say, this is what I see and this is how it is?
Well, it's interesting because um, I, when I first started to put it out there, I didn't worry about backlash because I knew it was true, and I really trusted this truth. And there was a person in my life who would become very significant, and I was very young, and the world was so much older than me, and he just said, tell them what you see, tell them what you think, and you don't have to know anything else. He said, they may ask you things you don't know. It's okay not to know them, because you know something they don't know. And Claudia, you know something that they need to hear, and they actually want to hear it. And I've hung on to that my whole career. I don't talk about things that I really don't think I know much about. I'll defer, but I have a lot of confidence in what I see. And
Have
yes, that's
you,
held me strong for a lot of years.
that's great advice.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
Have you seen clients change over the years, or have you seen the same issues repeat through families throughout time? Because you've been doing this a very long time.
Uh, I, for the most part, is same old, sadly so. Um, I think today, we have because of our understand today, because of neuroscience, we have an understanding of trauma in a way that we've never previously had. And so we can explain it differently than what we once did. I think that in many ways today we have a greater sophistication regarding assessing and diagnosing what it is that's going on. But we always have to be careful that we don't let the diagnosis get in the way of what can be effective treatment. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people in my early years, if somebody was a borderline, then it was like, well, you couldn't do anything, they're borderline. Well, so much of that borderline behavior was trauma, and that trauma was related to the disruption in their childhood development, related to how it was that they were growing up. And it's very treatable, and there's the potential for recovery is absolutely there. So even today I cringe sometimes with how quickly we want to put a diagnosis as if that's supposed to lead us to what the treatment is versus what is it that happened to this person and how can we work with that. So, again, our families, we have changes over the decades. I mean, the biggest change we have is how technology has influenced our lives, and how we've become less more isolated as families within our neighborhoods, within our communities, within our whole family structure. That's evolved in the last 30, 40 decades. Technology has helped to create that isolation. And so the challenge in many ways is even greater as a consequence of that. But in terms of the family itself, sadly, and so much of the trauma is the same trauma. The physical abuse, the sexual abuse that takes place, the causes of the impact of growing up when somebody's depressed, when somebody's a rager, when there's substance use disorders within the family. I think one of the differences with substance use disorder is we seldom today see somebody who's simply addicted to one drug or simply addicted particularly to just alcohol. It's usually a combination. And that combination can cause greater chaos and disruption more quickly in that family system.
I think we have a lot more SSRIs that are prescribed. And I think
Yes.
I've been seeing a lot more kids taking their parents' medication when they shouldn't be, and a lot more. Well, we didn't have ADHD back in the day, but now it's like Adderall, Ritalin, Paxil for everything. And I get these kids that are 18 and 19 that have been on, amphetamines for 10, 15 years. And all of a sudden the doctor goes, well, you're 18, no more, and they can't function. And it's they're med seeking, they're drug seeking, the behaviors are off the charts, and the parents are pulling their hair out. Have you
Yes.
seen that as well?
I've seen that as well. And I think in addition to the borderline diagnosis, the ADHD diagnosis or ADD diagnosis as well is one of those that's been severely misused in terms of not recognizing the underlying trauma. And that if we really work with that, this may be somebody that never needed medication to begin with. But we have so many kids on medication for which many of them, have benefited for a period of time, but that reliance on that outside source to be the answer, and as you say, readily become med seeking. But no, I very much see that.
What made you, I want to talk about your book. So, what made you, since we're talking about teens, what made you write this book, this workbook for teens?
Your
'Cause I
your
love this.
recovery, your teens.
I
Oh, you.
love this. I'm excited because there's very little out there for families and teens that the teens can actually understand and grasp. And I was reading through this, and like so much stuff in here is so relevant to today for a teenager and a tween and an early young adult. What gave you this inspiration?
Actually, it was the publisher called me and asked me. And I have been for 10 years. I oversee a young adult program at the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona. So for 10 years, I've been working specifically with 18 to 26-year-olds. Now, I do not run it on a daily basis. I'm an executive director and I have a staff of close to 35 people. But I am what we call the clinical architect, and I'm there frequently and I'm very hands-on. So this has been sort of my later in life, my heavy focus. And so when Harbinger Press came to me and said they specialize in doing workbooks in the mental health field, they said, would you be willing to do one for our teen division for young people struggling with substance use disorder? And I laughed to some degree because one is I knew I could do a workbook. I've done several workbooks in my career around various issues. But I said, teenagers and kids getting in trouble with alcohol and drugs, they really don't want to stop their use. They just want to, go underground and not get caught. And so I said, the other thing is kids don't really do books anymore. And so given that, are you sure as a publisher that this is a book you want to do? And they said, no, this is a book we want to do. I said, okay, I can do this book. And so I think when I did the book, it says it's for teens because it's through their teen division, but it's a wonderful book actually, I think it's a wonderful book for anybody who's willing to take a look at their use of substances, and particularly if there's some ambivalence around that. But it's certainly relevant to the teenager and the young adult as well. And I don't tell anybody they're addicted. I don't even tell anybody in the book that they need to stop their use. I want that teenager to hopefully come to an awareness that their life could be better if they didn't use. And not only could their life be better, they won't be getting in as much trouble probably, and they'll feel better about themselves. But in fact, life can be good. And if I can sort of walk them through a path, and I think, again, it's another one of my gifts, I think, in terms of my writing. Flow is really important. And when I speak at conferences, the flow of my presentation, I spend a lot of time thinking about sort of moving people to get to certain places in their own thinking. And so I did that with this book. And I deliberately didn't talk about some things that other people, in fact, the publisher even challenged me wanted me to talk about some things much earlier in the book than what I did. And I said, no, there's a reason to why I did this. We're not confronting a young person regarding, their addiction. We're going to walk them through a process. And I'd be really curious as to if there was a favorite exercise or chapter in the book for you, because I have a favorite one, and that's where I have people take a look at their values. So many young people say, I don't know who I am, and I don't have my own identity. And I like to believe that I think they have more of a sense of who they are than they think they do. So I walk them through these exercises where they come to recognize that I'm a person that has certain values. And then in that section, I walk them through, and when you're under the use of substances, what happens to those values that you value? And then I walk them through, how do you build a greater strength of the things that you value in your life as well? So that happens to be my favorite piece in the book.
So mine is living what you value, because
Okay.
I tell them when I'm working with them, I always say, where are you now? Where do you want to go? And they always say, well, I'm here and I want to get here. And I always say, but you're doing this. You're over here. And you want to go from point A to point B, but you're already at Z. Like, how are we getting there? So I love this specific one here on 67 and 68. This is where
And that's exactly the chapter I'm talking about. So that's really fun.
I love it. They get stuck and they call me and they say, well, I think I figured out I'm not who I want to be. I'm, this person, but I want to be this person. And I always say, well, how do we get there? What does that look like for you? And they start coming up with, well, I guess I need to maybe not smoke so much weed. And I'm like, okay, that's a great
It's a
idea.
good
How
start.
does
Yeah,
that look for you? And then they say, well, I'm only going to smoke Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, not during school. Okay, great. So they come to the realization without being told in the book, do this,
yes,
do that, do this. And then I
yes.
can work better with them because now it's their idea, not my
That's right.
idea. So it
That's
makes
right.
my
That's
life simple.
exactly how I hoped that book would be utilized. Very much so. I also have another favorite exercise in there, is where I talk about the neuroscience and recognizing when my limbic system is really making the decisions for me versus my prefrontal cortex. And so that's my limbic system telling me to jump in front of the car on the freeway. That's not me telling me to do that. And that whole part of that exercise is to separate out that what happens to them when they're under the influence. isn't really who they are, and that's another part of them that has actually at this moment greater power over them than their willpower has. And so that's a fun way for them to, I think, start to separate themselves from what could be an addiction.
Yeah, I've even recommended this to families where I'm working with the mom and dad, and I'll say, get this book and give your child the exercises, one a week, one every other day, give them something to do. And I have one mom and dad that say, well, he won't write in the book. I said, let him text you the answers. Let him
That's
email
the
you
point.
the answers if that's how he wants to communicate. I have one that does this. They speak into the phone and send a voicemail, and the mom says, why can't he just write it? I said, listen, meet
No,
him where he is. As long as we're getting movement, that's all that matters.
that's
We're
right.
getting
And
movement.
thank you for being that creative, because that was my concern. The kids don't really want to put things in a book, and they also don't really want to put things in the book if they think their parents are going to, read this and use this against them. And but I think I even say that in the preface, find your own way in which to convey this information. So great ideas. Text it, speak it out loud.
Yeah, it's awesome. So, of all the things you've written, because I know you've written so many things, what was your favorite book, or what is your most proud thing that you have done, or proud work that you put out there? Because you've done so many amazing things in this space.
I think I have to, I really, boy, so they're like your babies, your children. Do you have a favorite child? No, they're all so different from each other. But It Will Never Happen to Me, which happened to be my second book. People always think it's my first book. But my first book was also really important to me. It's called My Dad Loves Me, My Dad Has a Disease. And it's a book for children 5 through 12 years of age, who are living with substance use disorders. And it's told from the viewpoint of kids. And that's really special. But if I had to pick someone, it would be It Will Never Happen to Me. And I think it's because the timing of It Will Never Happen to Me back in the 1980s when I initially wrote it, it was really sort of a tipping point for, people, um, for the first time ever in our history, grasping what it meant to be in an addictive family system. Wherein today, if somebody says, "Oh, I grew up with alcoholism," well, you've heard that. You see that on television. You read that in storylines and novels and such. And now sometimes people really don't know what that means. They think they know what that means. Yeah, my dad was an alcoholic. But in terms of what does that mean for me and how has that impacted me, a lot of people still haven't grasped that. But back when I first wrote It Will Never Happen to Me, people were showing up at conferences and workshops with this being the topic, children of alcoholics, in the hundreds and even the few thousands. And we therapists didn't know how to work with this. So they were often the people in the audience, many of them having come from the same histories. It was a very emotional time. There was a lot of crying. I mean, there were times I had to just stop and do grounding exercises. Um, then there was a time where I did small retreats across the country with just 40 people, and I would take local therapists and sort of model group work with adult children. And those local therapists often became the leaders in their regional areas for how to work with what we call children of addiction, which today really is a lot of the trauma work that we do. That what we learned about children raised with addiction and how that impacts them moving well into their adulthood and working with that adult age child, that we could generalize what we learned about that to people from other types of troubled family systems. You didn't have to have addiction in the family to benefit from what we were learning and how to
I
work with people.
I applied your model to my family, which had no addiction but rampant mental health. And my
Yes,
dad was bipolar. So
yes,
when I was in college and I'm reading and I'm learning and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm the hero. In my dad, would be the addict, but it was the mental health piece. And as
yes,
I was learning more and more, I'm like, I can apply this to different families as I'm working with them, not just in addiction, but in mental health. And once you
yes.
learn how you respond to the person at that hierarchy, and you learn that you have control over your responses, things change. So I mean, your work is pioneering. It really made such a big difference, and it shaped who I am and what I've done, because I wouldn't have been in this space any further past that once I figured out that my family was a little different than everyone else's.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you. And today you get to shape the lives of other people personally and professionally. And I mean that's again one of the gifts I've had is to be able to watch this pass through professional generations now. I hate
Mhm.
to think of myself as having been around that length of time, but again, this is a wonderful gift to see it pass through the generations professionally.
So what's next for you? Do you have something lined up? Are you taking a break?
I actually am taking a break. In the last year, um, I had two books come out. I had Your Recovery, Your Life come out, and I had a book called Undaunted Hope come out. And Undaunted Hope was another wonderful book. It's the stories of people who have come into treatment for a variety of different reasons, from eating disorders, specifically because of trauma, maybe substance use disorder, intimacy disorders, etc. And I interviewed them and then would share, in essence, their story. And then I used commentary from extremely well-known people, Bessel van der Kolk, Dick Schwartz, people, well-known professionals in our field, and myself, commentary around their stories. And the whole purpose of that book was to, again, simplify people's struggles, to also let them, while I wanted to simplify what was going on, I did want them to see the complexity, and in seeing the complexity, not to think that there's some one answer. There's, one pill for depression. If you go to a 12-step group, everything will be okay. It's usually not some one answer. And I wanted them to also yet feel hope because the people that I interviewed all needed inpatient treatment. And so their crisis became so acute. Well, most people don't, in fact, need that. The majority of people are going to are able to respond to outpatient psychotherapy, or maybe they need an intensive outpatient program. But anywhere that people are at in the continuum of their struggle, I wanted them to see that they could reach out and ask for help. And so anyway, I finished these two books in this last year. So in the moment, I'm actually struggling with, is it just okay for me to take some time for myself? And one is I do a lot of things. I speak, I write books, and I oversee a program. So I think I'm going to just sort of sit back a little bit from my writing. At least I have two possibilities. One I've put on pause, and the other one I might put on pause. Pause could mean just to get through the summer. Pause could be another year. Um, so I don't know where I'm at with my writing. I still will speak. I speak less. I'm getting older, so the travel isn't near as much fun. Getting on the airplanes and staying in hotels, um, and so I think my real priority is attending to my program. I love walking in and doing groups. I mean, just last week I was in two different groups. It's gender specific, so I'd be in a group for 2 hours with the guys. The next day I'd go back and do 2 hours with the girls. And this family week, I go into family week, and being with the clients is really what makes my heart soar. And I'm at a place where things just need to be fun. Um, trying to give myself some grace here.
That's awesome. Well, you've done a lot. You can take as
Yeah.
much time off as you want because
Yeah.
you have so many evergreen ideas and the books are fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where can everybody find this book? Is it on Amazon? Is it in Barnes and Noble? Where do you have this book?
Online is Amazon, and anybody wants to go to Claudia Black author. There is a very well-known sci-fi actress. So looking under Claudia Black books, do look under Claudia Black author. But that's probably the most readily source for it. Your Recovery, Your Life is by Harbinger Press. People can also always go to my website, claudiablack.com. And again, just be aware if something seems a little off, you may have got to the sci-fi actress. It's been funny. She and I have been sort of dealing with this for many, many years, and uh, and I think we appreciate each other because I'll get funny letters and she'll get funny letters, but yeah. So claudiablack.com or Amazon is probably the best resource. Yeah. So, but thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you do. And I'm thrilled that you like my book for teens. And
I love it. And I
yeah.
want to thank you for taking the time out to come on. And our listeners are going to be very happy that you've joined us on the podcast. And We'll put all the links up for your books in the show notes so that they can purchase it. We'll send them to your website. If they want to look for public speaking, what have you, we'll send them direct to all of your links.
Okay. Thank you very much. You have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Unpause Your Life. And this is Dr. Cali Estes with my guest, Dr. Claudia Black.
Thank you for listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana. Head over to www.thelifecoachmethod.com to learn more about coaching yourself and how to become a master coach.